All right. Well, today I have with me Nick Wilkinson. Nick is the managing director of Steamclock Software. Nick, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and Steamclock?
Sure, absolutely. First, thanks very much for having me on the show. I'm very excited to be here. So, I lead Steamclock, and we are a company focused on making great mobile apps for growing tech companies. So we focus pretty much exclusively on mobile app development, doing everything from the initial strategy and consulting through to design, through to the actual development of the software itself. We do some web work where it's in service of a mobile experience, but really our expertise lies in mobile.
Awesome. Well, I know one of the typical questions I always start with is around kind of the story behind Steamclock, the origin story. And I know that you're the managing director, but you're not the person who founded it. So I'd love to hear your story, how you became the director of Steamclock, and maybe what you know about the origin of Steamclock.
Yeah, absolutely. So Steamclock has existed as a company for about 14 years. It was founded by two people. One was from Apple, one was from the gaming industry, and they just wanted to make cool apps. So this is around the dawn of the iPhone, and they did that for quite a while, and their apps got some critical acclaim, and they started taking on client work because they were enjoying what they were doing, and also appreciated some variety in the work. And over time, they built out a team to take on more complex projects and built the company basically into what it is today. My story started a little bit, I guess, before that. So going back maybe 20 years or so, I started my career as a project manager. So my background is in engineering. That's what I studied in school. And I worked for a while as a project manager in different industries. So manufacturing to start, and then logistics. I was working with NASA and the Canadian Space Program and other kind of universities and government organizations, and then ultimately found my way into software as a project manager. So about 10 years ago, I guess I started at my first agency that was kind of like a hybrid between a product and client services agency, where I really got a good sense of how devs collaborate, and kind of building on some other experience that I had doing sort of a one-man band web development slash design sort of effort on my own. And
Yeah.
so it was great just to see kind of how all the pieces fit together in like a real professional sense when it wasn't just me kind of figuring it out as I went.
Yeah.
And then that sort of transitioned into working at larger agencies and different kinds of projects, with kind of a broader spectrum of like use cases in terms of B2B and B2C, working in VR and machine learning and web apps and mobile apps and so forth. And I got a chance to build up a project management team where I was there. And also, I got a chance to work with a much larger agency. We were kind of embedded at some point in kind of a larger client services team that was like several times our size. So I was kind of lucky to see things from like the small scale all the way up to like very large scale, how things work in client services. And eventually got to the point where I didn't really want to manage projects anymore. Like, I mean, there was always more to learn, but I knew I wanted to stay in agency in that world. I knew that I liked small companies from the different experiences I had. And Steamclock had been on my radar actually for quite some time. They
Hmm.
just seemed to be a cool group of people doing cool work, and I really liked the vibe. But as a smaller company, they never really had very many opportunities that were a good fit for me until about just over 2 years ago. They had an opening for someone who was a little bit more in like the sales and client relationship management side of things. And I thought this sounds like a perfect fit because I don't want to really be managing projects anymore. I would like to stay in agency. The company seems awesome. So things worked out. And over the last couple of years, there was sort of a transition took place where our former CEO realized he wanted to go and do his own thing and start up his own company separate from Steamclock. And I was kind of growing my responsibilities, not just in the sales part of things, but also marketing and taking on like kind of maybe like leadership in some aspects of like how we're delivering our projects. And that was just sort of expanding naturally. And it just seemed like a good natural fit where just sort of one day it's like, hey, we should just like kind of make this official. And
Yeah.
where he would step away and I would step into that leadership role. And so, yeah, I've been leading the company now for about a year, and I'm really enjoying things.
Very cool. Do you feel like your background in project management like prepared you particularly well, or were there some other things you kind of learned along the way that have been particularly helpful in this role?
Yeah, definitely project management has helped me. So learning how to manage people's expectations, how to build consensus around like a clear vision for how to move forward, and doing that at different scales, and also when people have um, different perspectives on the problem at hand. So when you're trying to balance what a dev team needs versus what your business needs versus what a client might need, those might all be different things, but like how do you find some sort of happy medium where it's win-win for everybody, and you can move forward. So that type of skill set really has helped me a lot. And I think like the agency world has been a great place to refine that skill, because there's such a volume of projects and you're typically managing many projects at the same time
Yeah.
and different kinds of projects. So it's sort of like this rapid fire experience of just kind of always being on your toes and always being mindful of what other people might be going through. So I think that in particular has really situated me well for leading Steamclock, because it's the same type of thing, but just sort of adjacent to that. So now, like I definitely care about our client experience, but I'm kind of managing that through other people. And it's a different challenge, but similar enough that I feel like I'm well prepared there. And then also even going back to when I was, the one man band kind of, situation, doing web development and having to market myself and position myself and do the sales, and seeing the struggle between like how much time that takes aside from just like doing the work. I think that really helped to give me an appreciation for like all of the overhead that basically goes into making an agency work properly, so that
Yeah.
the team can really do great work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned some challenges. I guess one thing I'm curious about is, you've taken on this new role. Um, your job is now to kind of, keep things moving and growing the agency. So I'd love to like unpack a little bit more of your philosophy on like what it takes to grow, maybe some challenges that you faced in that so far, and kind of how you're approaching that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's worth taking a step back to define like growth and scaling and kind of what that means, because I feel like that can kind of mean different things at different companies. And that's why I was excited when the opportunity came up at Steamclock, and just over the course of kind of those early conversations when I was still being kind of vetted for the position, is just we saw eye to eye on what growth means. So we don't have any kind of aspirations to like scale to the moon in terms of headcount. Like we have no aspirations to be a 100-person organization. um, like coming into the role, I always felt that you should be able to do really great work that you can be proud of and do it profitably at any size. And so right now, Steam Clock is about 15 people. If we were to grow to like 20 people, I think that would be fine. But once you start getting beyond that, then you start getting different kinds of challenges. Like you start needing to, like there's more pressure to line up more work that might not necessarily be um, work that you would take otherwise. And that's some things that's kind of a situation that I saw in some of the other agencies where I worked, is when there were multiple different kinds of service offerings. Those like the genesis of like why those were offered in the first place was that desire for growth and for scaling. It's like, well, hey, we're getting these leads. We don't normally service this, but like maybe we should. So let's offer back-end development services and other things that are not necessarily related to why we got into the business in the first place. But at Steamclock, I mean, the company was born out of a desire to make really great mobile apps, and we've stuck to that basically throughout the 14 years, and there's no desire to change that. And it's kind of a different business if we were to start offering like back-end development, because then we're on the hook for performance and uptime and all these other things that right now we don't have to worry about because we collaborate with our clients on that.
Hmm.
Or if we were to offer like to really go all in on a web development, that presents different kinds of challenges. So I think a part of growth is knowing like the ways in which you don't want to grow.
Yeah.
Um, so when I think of growth and when we talk about it within the team, it's really more about how do we grow profit? Because we like what we do, we know who we are, which is a big part of things. So how do we make sure that we're making the kind of money that we would like to be making doing this sort of work? So a lot of that just comes back to like business fundamentals, like keeping an eye on expenses. So when times are good, we're not hiring out of enthusiasm, because we know that times might not always be good. So we have a great roster of local contractors who we can lean on to flex up and down as we get more successful or as things kind of pull back a little bit. So that's one thing, being responsible with like the biggest expense, which is obviously going to be wages. Rent is probably in there too. So like, what's a responsible situation for us in terms of office space? Like most of our team likes working remotely, but it is nice to have a space where we can kind of congregate and get together and talk and stuff. So like, what's the right size for us? What's the right location for that? But also keeping our eyes on like the little things, because it can be easy when you're just looking at wages and rent and like, oh, well, then there's like a bunch of other stuff. It's just the noise. It doesn't really matter. But like, do we need all those Figma licenses? Do we need that many Zoom licenses versus what we just get for kind of free? So it's worthwhile just every once in a while paying attention to that kind of stuff too on the expense side. And then on the revenue side, it's kind of all the classic things that you would want to do to set yourself up well for making sure that you're in a good spot there. So a lot of that comes down to, like, again, your positioning, so that you're lining up the right kind of clients, the clients that actually value what you do, and they understand that they're getting value for money. So that can mean things like making sure that you're well situated for signing like longer, steadier engagements than like a bunch of rapid, short engagements where like you're always kind of scrambling for the next thing. And maybe it's even incentivizing that. Like there are certain cases where when we're working with clients who we know we really get along with well, where we can even offer like a rate reduction if they're willing to sign for longer. Because I'd rather us have a smoother revenue stream over a longer period of time, where it's just like that setup, it's great. The team knows what they need to do. The client knows what they're going to get from us. And let's just like not worry about having to sign repeated renewal agreements every 3 months. And let's just do that for a year.
Yeah.
I'd rather do that than, cranking our rates up a little bit higher, but it's like a shorter engagement and then always having to stress out about like, well, we kind of need to keep feeding this beast. It leads to just basically a better growth pattern for us. So yeah, those are some of the things that we're looking at, and also like a lot of it goes back to the types of clients you have. So like as much as possible, we're trying to get where we have gotten away from billing by the hour, like getting away from that mindset of billing in terms of units of doing instead of units of thinking, because so much of our work really is consultative, and we want to make sure that we're attracting clients that understand that are seeking that, and who are not doing comparison shopping. It's like, well, this other agency, their rate is $10 an hour less than yours. It's like, well, oh, I guess we're not a fit then, if that's like the main concern.
Yeah.
And there's just so much time has been wasted, and not even just like with my experience at Steamclock, but in other organizations, where when you have clients that are kind of approaching you like that, you tend to be spinning your wheels a lot and not talking about the right things. And either you're not demonstrating the value that you're providing, or they just don't get it and you're not a fit. And it's just better to spend your time looking for people who are a fit.
Yeah. Absolutely. You mentioned positioning. I mean, in some ways, it sounds like some of that work began for you, with that focus on mobile apps. But is that something that you've had to refine, or I guess how does that play into maybe some of the tactics that you use to go to market?
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, you're absolutely right that a lot of that was done before I arrived. But I feel like there's constantly a tension of like, should we stick to that, or should we bend the rules this one time because this client seems kind of cool?
Yeah.
And that can be hard. And in some cases, like even right now, we're in talks with a potential client that is very cool, would be great to work with. It's not exactly what we do, and so like, okay, how can we bend the rules, and like in terms of bringing on some freelancers and just to kind of shore up our regular service offerings to make that happen. But unless like some very specific criteria are met, like it's making sure that we just stick to who we are. And so that's been my kind of main task over this course year, is just really not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, and making sure that the team also understands that, because I think there might have been a bit of apprehension with just anyone new coming in, like, well, how are things going to be different? And just reassuring people like, yeah, we're not going to be offering services XYZ. Like, we're really just going to stay true to who we are. And then, like you say, refining that, making sure that we have the right words to use so that people they feel it in their day to day, and then not just through the words, but also through the decisions that are met, or the decisions that are made. Um, and I think a part of that also comes through in like how we go about building relationships, like in terms of how we do our marketing and sales, which is very relationship based. It's not like necessarily like a short term transactional kind of point of view. Like I don't just show up at a conference and say, hey, like who wants an app, and get into a sales conversation. It's a super long game, but it's really about relationships, and it's about finding people. There's actually a quote I came across a little while ago that I have in my notes here, so I don't butcher it. It's by Simon Sinek. He says, the goal is not to sell what we have to the people who need it. The goal is to do business with people who believe what we believe. And
Mm.
I feel like that is the North Star that has helped us to refine, like, what are we doing here exactly as a mobile development shop? And it's to find people who believe what we believe. And we could spend a whole other podcast talking about what it is that we, what it is that we believe. But it really comes down to just like cool people doing cool work, and let's learn about that. And maybe we're a fit to help you out in some way, maybe we're not, but I'm better for having had the conversation of learning what's out there. So I think what's kind of new about our marketing is kind of that piece of like the going out, talking to people, the relationship building, having that view of attracting people who believe what we believe, having that permeate into like our blog posts and LinkedIn posts and whatever else we're putting out there, just using that as our North Star to increase our visibility and draw in those types of leads that we want to be working with.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Well, I'd love to dig into that even just a little bit deeper. I know a lot of dev shops, um, they don't really know uh, what they're doing when it comes to marketing. And it sounds like you've given this quite a lot of thought, and it informs a lot of different things that you do. So I'd love to kind of understand what is it that you guys do to generate leads, find new clients? Like, what do you feel like is the most important, or what are like the pillars of what's working for you?
Yeah. So we have the benefit of a pretty great track record. And so word of mouth is one of those pillars for sure. But if I was just to rest on that, I would be pretty uncomfortable because that will dry up over time if you don't do things to shore that up. And case studies are great, but if your visibility is decreasing over time, even if you're doing great work, your pipeline will dry up. So that's one part of it. But um, basically doubling down on just what I was talking about with the having that, finding people who believe what we believe and using that as the kind of the North Star. So that translates into like, what conferences should I go to? So if I'm looking at CES versus something that's much smaller and more catering to kind of quirky builders. Um, there is like a strong case to be made to go to the Quirky Builder Conference if I'm having to choose between the two, because
Hmm.
that kind of falls in line with the cool people doing cool work. And it's, again, that long game is like those people know people, and that's a community worth being a part of versus CES, which the venue is the entire city of Las Vegas. And if I was going to go and do that, then there needs to be like a really strong strategy about, well, what am I doing there? Who am I meeting? How am I going to meet people to have those conversations, to find those people who believe what we believe? Um, so that's a part of it, is the relationship building that happens in person, but also the relationship building that can happen online. So making sure that when we post stuff on our blog, it's kind of following certain criteria. Like, what do we stand for? Is kind of one category. What do we feel like we're in a great position to teach that our target audience is going to be interested in? So we've identified pretty clearly that like our target audience are CTOs or other tech leaders, because our bread and butter client tends to be like a growth stage SaaS company, generally B2C, where they found product market fit. They are generating revenue, they have a web app of some sort, but then they want to grow into mobile for whatever reason, generally like if they want to increase their number of users, or there may be other, just offer a kind of a better, slicker experience on mobile than
Hmm.
what they could do with like a responsive web app. And so that's kind of our ideal or kind of aspirational client, and that's who we're wanting to reach. So like, what do they want to know about mobile? Like if they're entering this for the first time, like maybe it's interesting to know about when Apple changes some their policies around deleting accounts, and there was a lot of like kerfuffle around this, maybe going back a couple of years when Companies were some companies were skirting the rules, others were like abiding by them. Some people were getting rejections and it wasn't clear why. So we wrote a blog post about that. Like, here's what you need to know. And like, what if you're in a highly regulated industry and you're a bank? Like, what does account deletion mean in that case? Like, if I delete my app, I have to close my bank account. Like, what's going on here? So basically, trying to find things that are going to be of interest to the people who you're trying to reach. And then that can start a conversation. So often, like when we're putting out posts like that, when I get a call from a lead, then there's like, hey, we saw this blog post, we want to learn more about this. And often those initial calls aren't even necessarily like a sales call. It's just really more like consulting, just to kind of throw some ideas around and see if we are actually the right fit. Or maybe depending on what tech stack they have built their web app with, maybe they don't need a web app or a mobile app at all. Maybe they're really well positioned to offering something great with what they already have. And being honest about that earns us so much more credibility. Like, we don't want to be forcing people into work that they don't need, because ultimately that's going to be very unsuccessful and make everyone unhappy. So I feel like I'm kind of veering away from the original intent of your question now, but I feel like it's all kind of intermixed in kind of the marketing and the
No.
different approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you mentioned conferences, content, things like that. Do you do anything like cold outbound? I know some agencies do that, and some people have strong opinions about whether you should be doing that. But I'd love to kind of get your thoughts about kind of I guess maybe the scope of the things that you're doing to get right fit people coming to you.
Sure. Yeah. So starting first with cold outbound, I think that's a great question. And I agree, there are lots of very strong opinions, and I don't actually have one yet. I feel like, well, first of all, it's not something that we do, and it's not something that we have done. So we've looked at, should we be doing this? And um, I feel like there's a right way, but that it isn't necessarily cold outbound. Like, I feel like if I were just to show up in people's LinkedIn inboxes and they have no idea who I am, I'm like, hey, notice you've got a cool company and we make apps. Maybe there's something to talk about. Like, the chances of that turning into something worthwhile are probably very low and probably not worth my time. But if I'm showing up in places like, say, different Slack communities or even different like LinkedIn groups where there's more of a natural opportunity for a relationship, there's a natural and kind of like organic experience about like, hey, like, tell me more about your company. This is really interesting. I'm not even trying to sell you anything. I'm just like wanting to learn because it's interesting. That could potentially turn into something down the road. So for us, I mean, I mean, this is the same across many different kinds of agencies. Like, it isn't just that there's a need, but like when that need comes up. And so timing that can be incredibly difficult. So that's why we kind of take this long view approach. It's really just like increasing our visibility to build relationships that matter, and at some point, like that could pay off. Um, and it has, I guess. So like that's why we like to double down on that. Another approach that we take is because we tend to work mostly with these growth stage companies. They have great relationships with VCs. So
Mm.
we prioritize basically making relationships with VCs, like having them know what we do, what we're a fit for, what we're not a fit for, so that when funding is being considered, and it seems like mobile is a part of the strategy that they would like to be funding, then we would at least be a part of that conversation, if not like in some of the rooms where those conversations are happening. So it sort of gets
Right.
ahead of the game a little bit, and that's something that we found some value in as well. I think another one of our pillars is relationships with other agencies. I love meeting other agencies that have nothing to do with what we do, because often we get leads that, and I'm sure this is a common thing, people's contact boxes get filled up with things that have nothing to do with what you're offering, and it's a mystery as to why they even reached out. But it seems like, in theory, a qualified lead for someone, not us, but for somebody.
Hmm.
And I love being able to, have just a short email back and forth just to find out a little bit more, and then pass that person off to somebody who I think might be able to help them better than we can. And then it's reciprocal. So oftentimes we'll get leads to us through other like refers, other agencies that we work with and have a good relationship with. And that's worked out really well. So like we've worked with like Meta Lab and other local agencies here, and that's also been like a really good source. And then otherwise, it's kind of the standard things that I guess most people are doing, blogging, LinkedIn content, um, and we're starting to get into advertising a little bit. We ran some experiments with that a couple of years ago and had some mixed results, but I feel like just because things don't necessarily work the first time the way you hope doesn't mean that it was the wrong thing to do. It might just be that our strategy wasn't quite calibrated enough. So that's
Mhm.
something that we're still keeping our eyes on. But it's the kind of the overall theme really is just, it's not visibility for the sake of visibility. It's visibility among the people who we think have a strong likelihood of being interested in what we do, but also putting out content that we think is really going to be valuable for them, and not just like corporate update kind of things that are a little bit more
Yeah.
generic, but something that's more targeted and actually useful.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like one of the common threads that you've mentioned is not just you know, avoiding transactional situations and
Mhm.
erring more on the side of relationship building. That goes to like playing the long game. Sometimes it's these potential partners. It's like that might not have fruit in the short term, but 9 months from now or a year from now, you might have a few leads trickling in on a regular basis because you kind of just built a relationship with some of those folks.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this sort of like laws of three, I guess, that like when somebody has this kind of three different touch points, it's like lodged in your memory a little bit more. So there was a lead reached out to us a while ago. They had met one of our developers at a conference like 7 years ago. And then they saw a blog post just by happenstance somewhere. And then after that, they're connected with somebody who's connected to me, and they saw a LinkedIn post. It's like, oh yeah, Steamclock. And then they reached out because they happened to need some assistance with mobile at that point.
Mm,
But it all started with that, conversation. I don't even know what developer that was, but 7 years ago. And that's the kind of approach that we're wanting to take, which is a little bit unnerving, because like when you start to see your pipeline dry up a little bit, you're not thinking, okay, what can I do now that's going to pay off 7 years from now? You want something that's going to pay off like 7 weeks from now.
yeah.
There's kind of going back to what I mentioned off the top about word of mouth. Like we have a little bit of a good situation here where there is like already momentum and a flywheel going, and the strategies that we're using now are to keep that flywheel in motion.
Hmm.
If I were trying to start a flywheel from scratch, then I think probably my strategies would be a little bit different, but still with those themes of like authenticity and value and relationships, but probably tweaked a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely found that that's true for my own business and trying to bring a new business. Um, well, I wanted to kind of shift gears to looking forward, to really, I guess what's something that as you look forward, where do you see like the most growth potential? And is there anything that you feel like is holding you back?
Sure. So that's a good question. I think when I think of growth potential, I'm thinking in terms of like the very quickly changing technology landscape, like, and certainly with AI right now,
Right.
but more specifically, and maybe this is more relevant to us and what we do, but Apple Intelligence. And I feel like this is both an opportunity and what's holding us back. um, there's so much potential there that if things worked as promised, and there's this new kind of Siri experience where you're just talking and it has all this context about you based on what it knows, what your phone knows about you. um, I think the promise of a voice first experience is very interesting, and it sort of would be following through on the promise of like the AI devices that we've seen recently, like the humane AI pin and the Rabbit R1, but basically on the device that we're already carrying in our pockets.
Hmm.
That offers new kinds of UX patterns and challenges when you're speaking first and just having a screen to kind of back up that experience, offering supplementary information and visualizations. Um, it's something that we've started experimenting with and already learning a lot about. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I can imagine a lot of our current and future clients wanting to kind of experiment with that and see what voice first would mean for them and their particular app. But it's also holding us back in that like Apple Intelligence is not great right now, and um, like the reviews are kind of mixed. It's different than like it's kind of new, but it hasn't really followed through on what people claim it can be. And I'm very reluctant whenever people talk about the potential of a new technology, because if you think back to when Siri was first introduced, that was going to be this amazing new way of living where we're going to talk to our phones all the time. And that was 14 years ago. And now I'm still using Siri to like occasionally set a timer, but I don't trust it to do much more than that.
Yeah.
So potentially like a Siri based on LLMs could be very different and much more useful, but the jury's still out on that. So it's an opportunity we're gearing up for. We're trying to learn as much as we can about the tools that Apple and Google are making available for that, but also not like necessarily betting the farm on that being like the way forward. I think for a long time there's still going to be a need for kind of what our bread and butter is right now, but we want to make sure that we're responsive and nimble to things as they change. Um, and I think that like AI is sort of like an example of that type of thing. Cause like every once in a while, especially over the last like 5 or so years, we've been seeing these hype cycles of like metaverse and crypto and other things where they kind of rise and then fall a little bit and they're still kind of there in the background. We want to make sure that we're keeping our eyes on these things, but not going too deep so that we get ourselves into trouble when the hype really dies down and maybe there's not as much demand as we thought.
Right.
So it's really about making sure that our skills are broad enough that we can take advantage of these opportunities when they come up, and not so specific that we're like losing out on what would have been opportunities had we just stayed the course with what we're good at now. So yeah, I mean, to answer the question about opportunities, I think the future is looking very bright, but also with a pinch of salt that
Yeah.
maybe it's not the extreme end of that spectrum. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more dialed down than that.
Yeah. It's like you don't want to chase the shiny objects too far. You might want
Yeah,
to kind of put your uh I don't know what metaphor to use, but kind of test the waters, but
yeah,
don't get in a full on boat and start sailing down that road because that
yeah.
could take you in a bad direction.
Yeah, and I've been in situations like that before where companies have gone all in on certain hype cycles, and I mean, had that paid off, it would have been fantastic. But it's a very much like a high risk, high reward kind of situation, where not every hype cycle is going to get you to where you want to go. Maybe this AI one will, and it seems like there's a lot of promise there. But again, that comes down to like what are you doing as a company? Who are you as a company? And if you've got that really locked down and you're comfortable with that, we're comfortable with who we are. We're comfortable with our ability to kind of jump on things as they come up, but also stay the course and just keep getting better at what we do.
Yeah, that's huge and very important. Well, I think one of the things that I'm taking away from our conversation is kind of how important it is to really know what you do well and really stick to your guns with that. I feel like that's a difficult thing for a lot of agencies, but it sounds like that's really been a benefit to Steam Clock.
Absolutely. When I started out in the more kind of sales side of things, when I first joined the company, it was so empowering to go into a sales call, knowing that in most cases, the lead didn't need what we are selling. um, and it changes the dynamic of the conversation. So it's much more about consulting and like, well, what is it that you really need? And we even have a microsite online called, I think it's called, do you really need a mobile app? And basically it takes you through this kind of animated checklist of like different criteria, and in the end, in most cases, probably you don't need a mobile app, and that's okay. Like you should go and do what you need to do, which is probably a web app or something else. Um, but where that comes from is knowing who we are as a company and what we're great at and what we're not as practiced at, and making sure that we're not trying to pull a fast one on a lead. When they come up and say, hey, we need a web app for something, I mean, we could say, sure, we have people on our team who are very practiced at making web apps, and we could do that. But if we were to do that just because we have a few people who are idle, and then we get kind of locked into this months long web app project, and then something truly exciting comes up, then we're kind of a little bit screwed in that, well, those people would have been a better fit for this other project. And now we're doing this thing that isn't really us. And like, is this even going to be a case study for us? Like, are we going to advertise the fact that we did this? And because our projects, like if the projects are small and they're going to stay small and it's just like a few weeks or something, if you're in that type of business, maybe that is a little bit more palatable. But for us, our projects tend to be in the months, like it probably generally no shorter than 3 months, and typically up to like 6 to 8 months or longer, depending on how long the client stays with us for iterative work.
Mhm.
So if we're going to make a decision to lock somebody in for 6 to 8 months, it better be something that we know is really helping us to build the company, and helping us to double down on who we know we are. So yeah, that's a big part of our sales conversations is just um, it's them vetting us as much as we are vetting them. Is this going to be a good relationship? And I feel like when we get that right, it works out really right. Like Some of our clients, or one of our clients, has worked with us for 7 years. And we have another couple of clients who've been with us for 3 years, doing iterative development over that time on their mobile apps and managing it for them. And that's really what we're looking for. Somebody who is going to understand the value that we provide and stick with us for the long haul, or somebody who, like, equally, we have clients who come to us and they don't want to be locked in, and that's cool too. Like, we know that people want to build up internal capacity, and we'll help them do that. We'll help provide the consulting and the training necessary to get their internal team up to speed so that they know what they need to do. But again, it all comes back to, like, who are we, what do we want, and a lot of that is like our skills, but also like how we want to treat our clients.
Yeah. I did have one other question, and then we can wrap up. But I've talked to some folks who, who are in kind of the dev agency space, who they're reluctant to kind of niche down, into just mobile apps or just some, one particular area, because they're worried about their team kind of getting bored of the same type of work, like thinking, oh well, the reason we kind of entertain a wide scope of projects is because we want to keep our team kind of stimulated and stretched. Um, what would you say? I guess how would you argue against that? Um, if somebody was talking to you, like kind of saying that.
Yeah, well, I think, like, down scoping to more specific niche is scary if you're starting at a broader suite of services that you offer, because, like, you will be saying no to work that you could otherwise do, and that will be a change of expectations among your team. Like, if they're used to that variety, and you're now looking at going deeper as opposed to broader into certain areas, well, I mean, maybe people aren't into that, and I think it really, like, that's why it's important to have conversations among the team, and that's why I like having, like, why I like working at smaller companies too, is you can have those types of conversations more effectively with smaller groups of people,
Mhm.
and kind of steer the ship in a way that is more in line with how people are thinking. So, um, for us, the danger, or the, I guess, the fear was going the other way, like that we would kind of up scope and start offering more things and growing headcount in areas that we're not necessarily all that practiced in. Um, and I mean, I think that's, again, it comes down to, like, who are you and why are you in this in the first place?
Yeah.
Um, and uh, so for us, I mean, we love mobile, and we don't necessarily shy away from the lack of that perceived variety, because there's so much to learn. Like, every day we're learning new things about what Apple has made available to build with, and every year there's new things like Apple Vision Pro. That's a whole new ecosystem that's opened up for us to learn about and see if that's a fit for what we do.
Mm.
And even when certain platforms don't necessarily take off in terms of a developer experience, like Apple TV or the Watch, it's still it's valuable to know about, because it will come to bear on a project somehow, or to even to be able to consult effectively about that. Like, if a lead comes in hot with an idea for an Apple TV app, well, like, maybe, but also, like, the chances of succeeding there commercially are, like, pretty slim. So, like, there are other options. Maybe let's consider some of those, and see what's going to really hit the nail on the head for you.
Yeah.
So I feel like in developing deeper expertise, there's actually a tremendous amount of variety that opens up. It's just kind of a matter of like, how you look at, or how you define variety, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so, and I think it really comes down to preference also. Like, if you want to have knowledge, if you favor breadth more than depth, like, that's totally fine, and that can be a decision that you make for your team. But if you value depth more than breadth, like, that's equally valid. That's the path that we chose. It can work. um, I think moving from one to the other, there's definitely complication and challenges there, though, and that's kind of the
Yeah.
sticky part.
No, absolutely. Well, Nick, I appreciate you coming on the show. I've learned a lot, and it's been good kind of understanding a little bit more about your journey at Steam Clock and what Steam Clock does. For people who want to learn more, but either they have an app that they want to build, or who just kind of like want to keep up with what you're putting out on LinkedIn and on your blog, what's the best way for people to stay in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, you can check us out at steamclock.com, and there you'll find out more about what we do, what our offerings are, our team. We have a breakdown there. Also, I think we have links to our team, like whether it's their GitHub accounts or LinkedIn, like in my case, and also our blog. Also, yeah, you can connect with me directly on LinkedIn. You can just search me up and say you were listening to the podcast and had a good time, hopefully. And yeah, we can connect. And if you want to chat, if there is a project, or even if you just want to chat and kind of talk more about what you're doing and want to learn more about Steamclock, I'm definitely up for that.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Nick, for coming on the show, and I'm excited to stay in touch.
Likewise, thanks so much for having me. It was a really great time.
Yeah, likewise.